What if a single click could destroy the entire career you spent your youth building? That's exactly what happened to Emma Blair, and when the screen lit up in the boardroom, she was no longer the woman she thought she was. That morning, the 34th floor of Argent's Corporation wore its usual suit of luxury and cold precision. Rushed footsteps, the clacking of keyboards, the scent of freshly brewed coffee, all blended with a pressure that quietly mounted behind thick glass walls. But amid the familiar routine, Emma walked with a heart pounding fast because today was the day her dream would be named. For the past 3 months, she had practically lived in the office, trading sleep and decent meals to complete the Project Nova's proposal, the project that, if approved, would make her the youngest strategy director in the company's history. Just last night, she was still reviewing every data line, every chart, every simulation. There was no room for error. She believed in her work. And then just one click. One fateful click. The slide opened, but it wasn't Novus. On the screen appeared a completely different document containing leaked classified information, internal violations, and data she had no clearance to access. The atmosphere in the boardroom shifted instantly. Surprise turned quickly into suspicion, then sharp judgment. Emma stood frozen, unable to comprehend what was happening. "This isn't my file. I swear, She tried to speak, but her words vanished in a storm of silence. No one was listening anymore. They were only watching and judging. The CEO closed the folder and declared flatly, "Ms. Blair, as of this moment, you are suspended, and you may very well be facing serious legal consequences." Emma was escorted out of the boardroom in a daze of humiliation. She couldn't recall how many steps she took, only the cold eyes, the whispers behind her back, and the silence of those who once called her the most dependable teammate. And as the elevator doors closed, Emma still didn't know the USB she trusted as her own was the very knife planted in her back. And the hand that planted it belonged to the sister she had always called family. But in that very moment, a new person was born. Not the Emma Blair of yesterday, but the woman who would rise from the wreckage and rewrite her own fate. The small apartment on the 7th floor had once been Emma's refuge after long, exhausting workdays, but now it felt terrifyingly silent. She didn't turn on the lights. Everything in the room seemed too bright for a mind that had just been crushed. The same grey sofa where the two sisters often sat eating instant noodles late at night. The same photo of their graduation day hanging beside the bookshelf, Emma and Amelia, her sister, 3 years older, arms around each other, smiling as if the world was theirs. But today, that smile was nothing more than the relic of a trust already dead. Amelia sat in the kitchen, calmly slicing fruit, headphones on, but no music playing. When Emma opened the door, she didn't look up right away. It wasn't until the door closed, with a heavy thud, that Amelia slowly spoke, "You're home. Are you okay?" That seemingly innocent question cut through her like a polished blade. Emma didn't answer. She simply walked to the table and placed the sealed laptop on the shelf. "They said someone swapped my presentation. Someone used my login, my USB." Amelia nodded slightly, her expression unsurprised. "Then, you should have been more careful. Sometimes carelessness is a crime too." Smooth response. Each word soft as feathers, but cold as steel. Emma looked into her sister's eyes, and for the first time, something felt off. A month ago, Amelia had seemed thrilled when Emma was publicly praised by the CEO during a company-wide meeting. A week ago, she had invited Emma out to celebrate her almost promotion, and 3 days ago, Amelia was the only one home when Emma accidentally left her USB on the bedroom desk. Emma's hand clenched slightly. She had no proof, just a gut feeling. But that feeling was sharp as a blade. "Do you think someone did this on purpose?" she asked, eyes locked on her sister. Amelia finally looked up and met her gaze. She smiled, but not the kind of smile born of empathy. It was a smile of victory disguised behind a familiar mask. "Emma, this world isn't as kind as you think. And there isn't always room for both sisters to be great. One of us had to step back. You understand that, don't you?" Emma said nothing. She turned away, walked into her room, and closed the door, sealing off a chapter of life where family once meant more than ambition. Because now she knew the truth. She hadn't been betrayed by a stranger. She had been betrayed by the very person who used to share meals with her, who used to call her little sister. And from that moment in the silence, a vow was born. Not a vow of revenge, but of rising, and of never letting anyone else write her name in the book of her life again. That night, the entire city seemed to swallow the young woman who had just been cast out of the dream she had chased for 6 years. Emma sat silently by the window of her pitch-dark bedroom, her laptop resting like a mute witness to a downfall too heavy for screams. Down on the street, the headlights of cars streamed endlessly. People moved, lived, stayed busy, while she was left alone, with the same questions echoing endlessly in her head. Why me? Why her? The business card once signed by the CEO now lay in the trash. Her company email was locked, and she had been removed from every internal channel. Even her closest colleague, the one who had eaten lunch with her every day for 3 years, sent only a short message. "I can't help you right now. I'm sorry." Emma didn't cry. She had already passed the phase of pain. What remained now was emptiness, as if someone had sucked all the oxygen from the room. No justification had been accepted. No one had truly listened. But what left her breathless wasn't the loss of her career. It was the shattering of trust. A sister, the one with whom she had once shared everything, from warm blankets to dreams, had chosen to steal her final voice without a second of hesitation. In the middle of the night, under the dim light of her desk lamp, Emma reached for the old notebook her mother had left behind. On the very first page, a handwritten line appeared like a whisper: "If no one gives you a chance, create one yourself." She flipped through the pages, her mother's humble notes on how to run the family's small grocery store, handwritten calculations down to the last penny raw, and honest ideas in simple words. And in that moment, Emma realized something she still had herself. She still had a heart that refused to surrender, and a will that no one, not even someone bound by blood, could trample forever. That night, while the world turned its back, a girl began redrawing the map of her life, not with a $1 million proposal, but with a resolve forged in heartbreak. No one knew it yet, but that night, an empire was born from the darkest room by the most underestimated soul. 2 weeks after the scandalous dismissal, the name Emma Blair had all but vanished from every conversation at Arjun's. But beyond the gleaming doors of those towering buildings, Emma was no longer standing still. She began her mornings with the only job still open to someone branded a data breach risk, a part-time server at a tiny cafe nestled between 2 high-rises. A world apart from sterile boardrooms, this place carried the scent of warm pastries, the soft hum of old jazz, and customers who didn't care who she used to be. They only wanted hot coffee, a smile, and someone to bring it on time. Emma didn't feel ashamed. She knew this was her new starting line. No more oversized keyboards, no more laser-pointed strategy pitches, but here she could truly see people's eyes. Each day, She observed her customers listen to their everyday stories, memorized the way someone smiled when called by name, or how another stared silently for a long time at a cooling cup of coffee. And then a man appeared. He always came at exactly 9:17 a.m., sat in the same seat by the window, and ordered the same items: black coffee without sugar and a soft butter roll. He didn't talk much, didn't smile, didn't use a phone. Each time Emma brought him his order, he'd only nod in thanks. But those eyes, deep still and never looking away, sometimes made her feel as if he knew more than he let on. Until one morning, as she placed the cup down, as usual, the man suddenly asked, "If you could rebuild your life from scratch, what would you choose to begin with?" The question had no subject, no emphasis. It floated in the air like a quiet ripple. But it made Emma freeze. Her hand stopped over the tray of pastries. His gaze wasn't judging, just waiting. She looked up, meeting his eyes clearly for the first time. "I'd start by becoming someone worth trusting, even if no one trusts me anymore." The man smiled faintly, nodding as if he had been waiting for that answer for a very long time. Without another word, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a business card. He turned it over. On the back was only a single email address. No name, no title, no logo. Emma stood silently as he walked away. In her hand was a thin, weightless card, but it felt like she had just been handed a key. She didn't know what door it would open, but deep inside, she sensed this man was no ordinary customer, and the question he left behind wasn't asked by chance. The nameless business card sat quietly on Emma's desk for 3 days, like a silent dare. She had picked it up dozens of times, typed out an email, only to delete it again. Every time her eyes met the words revivalnocturnelabs.net, something stirred inside her chest, a primal instinct, unexplainable but impossible to ignore. It wasn't curiosity. It was something only those who've lost everything would understand. When you have nothing left to protect you, have nothing left to fear. And that night, in her small room, lit by a dim yellow bulb, with trembling fingers hovering over the keyboard, Emma finally typed, "To the man who asked me if I'd rebuild my life, I have nothing left, but I still have this fire. If you're real, talk to me." She hit send, expecting silence. But just 6 minutes later, in the haunting stillness of night, her laptop screen lit up with a new notification, one new message. From JH. No greeting, no introduction, no pleasantries. Just 3 short lines, as if they'd been waiting to be sent for a long time. "We've seen you fall. You didn't lie. Are you ready to rise, not as an employee, but as the one who writes the rules?" She held her breath, not from fear, but from understanding. Someone had seen her, someone knew, and someone was offering her a way forward. Attached was a PDF titled "Clean Frame Transparency as a Foundation, Not a Threat." Inside was the blueprint of a tech platform designed to make the entire employee evaluation process fully transparent, eliminating bias, dismantling manipulation, and giving a voice back to people like her, those buried under prejudice. But what took Emma's breath away wasn't the project. It was the name at the bottom of the document: Jonathan Hale, a name that once rocked Silicon Valley, a genius often referred to as the man who redrew the power map, the same man who had disappeared after a legal war that shook the investor world. And now he had returned. Through a cup of coffee, a single question, and a business card with nothing but an email address. Emma sat frozen. The world paused for a few seconds. She knew this wasn't a typical opportunity. This was a calling, a summons from the shadows, from the silence, from the very pain that had tried to bury her. She placed her fingers back on the keyboard. No more hesitation. No more fear. You're not the only one who wants to rewrite the rules. Let's begin." And in that moment, the woman they once framed, humiliated, and dismissed as a system error began rewriting that very system, line by line, strategy by strategy, decision by decision, not for revenge, but so no one else would ever have to stand alone the way she once did. After sending that final email, Emma's life was no longer quiet. But this new form of busy didn't come from workplace pressure or the tension of boardroom drafts. It came from something quieter, lonelier, yet strangely, it made her feel more alive than ever. Every morning at 5 a.m., Emma sat in her small room with her aging laptop, coding line by line, a platform she had once longed for, back when she was just another employee. She began building an evaluation system free from bias, designing algorithms that assess behavior through fair data, a system where employees no longer feared their bosses and where real talent could be seen without compromise. Each night, she received a brief email from Jonathan Hale, sometimes no more than a single line, check line 247. The logic flaw is in the perspective, not the data. He didn't explain, didn't teach like a mentor. He offered clues, and she had to find the path herself. And with every bug she fixed, Emma wasn't just refining code, she was unraveling the knots inside her soul: doubt, pain, fear of failure. Then one night, precisely at 3 a.m., her laptop buzzed. Incoming video call, JH. Emma sat up straight, her heart pounding. The screen lit up to reveal Jonathan Hale's stern but composed face. No lines of worry, no smugness of a tech mogul, just piercing eyes and a raspy, steady voice. "I didn't choose you because you were the best. I chose you because you were the only one who didn't abandon herself when everyone else walked away." Emma didn't respond. She didn't have to. She understood. Jonathan nodded, then placed a folder on the table. "For the next 6 months, we won't call this a company. It's a movement. I need you at the front. The mind, the heart." She swallowed hard and nodded. Then he said the one thing she would never forget. "It's time to turn your downfall into the pivot point of an entire system." The screen went dark. No effects, no soundtrack. Only the sound of Emma's heartbeat, louder than ever. The next morning, she wrote the first line of the project's founding document. Clean frame transparency begins not with code, but with courage. And just then, in the apartment next door, Amelia, the sister who once stole Emma's opportunity, sat on the sofa with a cup of coffee, scrolling through social media. She paused at a headline starting to make waves. A new platform is quietly rising, led by a name once erased from every Arjun's roster. Amelia froze. She didn't yet realize what seed she had planted. But Emma did, all too clearly. This time, she would be the one setting the rules, and this time, no one would rewrite her manuscript. One July morning, sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows of the little cafe Emma still visited like a habit too ingrained to break. But today, she wasn't behind the counter, nor was she wearing an apron. She sat in the corner booth, laptop open, hundreds of lines of code scrolling across the screen with a new interface design for Clean Frame clearly displayed a tool that in just a few weeks would change how the entire HR industry operated. Emma dressed simply, her hair neatly tied back, but her eyes no longer belonged to the woman who had once been thrown out of a boardroom. They were the eyes of someone who knew she was on the right path, even if no one else could see it yet. The cafe door suddenly opened with the familiar jingle of bells. A tall figure in a crisp office dress and high heels stepped inside, carrying with her a sudden chill in the middle of summer. Amelia. Emma paused for half a beat, but gave nothing away. She simply took a sip of her coffee, her eyes never leaving the screen. But her heart, though, braced, still clenched for a moment. Amelia walked to the counter, ordered like any stranger would. She scanned the room. And of course, it took less than 2 seconds to spot Emma. "Oh, you're here too. What a coincidence." Her voice was sweet as honey, but Emma had heard it enough to recognize the bitterness underneath. "You still like calling carefully planned moments coincidences? Huh." Amelia gave a soft laugh, placing her hand on Emma's table, like they were still two sisters sharing midnight noodles. "You know, whatever happened, I still hope you don't blame me. Things sometimes happen because you trusted too easily." Emma didn't nod, didn't shake her head. She just tilted her head slightly, locking eyes with her sister. "I know, and you were the most expensive lesson of all." Amelia faltered for a split second, but hid it behind a smile. She glanced at Emma's laptop screen and raised a brow. "This project, clean frame, right? People have been whispering about it. Rumor has it there's funding from someone famous who disappeared from the tech scene." Emma gently closed her laptop, lifted her coffee eyes, never leaving her sister. "Yes, and this time no one touches the draft. No one rewrites it. And I don't need anyone's validation to know I'm on the right track." She stood up, slowly, walked past Amelia without another word. But just before leaving the table, she paused and whispered, "You thought you could erase me, but soon you'll realize that was the day I actually started to exist." And with that, Emma walked away, leaving behind the twisted smile of someone used to winning, but now beginning to realize the game had a new player at the helm. 3 days after the unexpected encounter with Amelia, everything on the surface seemed calm, but Emma knew better. Anyone who's ever survived betrayal learns one truth: when the person who hurt you smiles again, it's not a sign of peace. It's the beginning of their next move. Emma was in the middle of a Zoom meeting with newly hired engineers, analyzing data flow from the first demo version of CleanFrame, when her personal phone vibrated. An unknown number, no name. Normally, she'd ignore it, but this time, something in her gut told her to excuse herself and take it. On the other end was a man's voice, low and cautious, as if calling from a place where he shouldn't be heard. "Ms. Blair, yes." "Who's speaking?" He paused for a few seconds, then spoke quickly, almost in a whisper. "I used to work at Arjun's. I don't want to get involved, but you need to know this. Your sister Amelia is approaching a major investor. They're saying you're about to launch CleanFrame, and she's trying to convince them that you stole the idea from the old company." For a moment, Emma felt her heart clamp painfully in her chest. She bit her lip, steadying her voice. "Why are you telling me this?" The man let out a quiet, tired laugh. "Because I used to believe in her, just like you did. And I lost everything because of that trust. But at least I still have my conscience." Click. The call ended. Emma stood still, phone in hand, eyes locked on something distant only she could see. The rage inside her didn't erupt. It flowed like molten lava, silent, deep, and scalding. She knew Amelia wasn't just trying to sabotage a project. She was aiming to destroy Emma's name. Again. But this time, the attack wasn't targeting her past. It was aimed at her future. Emma returned to her desk, opened the project files, and hit send on the latest backup to Jonathan Hale. With a single-line note: "Someone's lighting straw around the fortress, but I'll show them I didn't build it out of straw." Then she opened a browser and typed in an internal address only 2 people in the world knew: CleanFrame Protocol Alpha, the secure access point to their official Counter-Strike systems. This time, Emma wasn't playing defense. This time, she was preparing to strike first. On Friday night, while most of the tech world gathered at the grand event held in Orium Tower, a place hailed as the holy ground for investors and million-dollar startups, Emma entered through the side entrance. No reporters, no flashing cameras, no luxurious gown or honorary badges. She wore a minimalist black suit, hair neatly tied back, and a badge that read consultant, just like hundreds of other tech specialists. But only one person in that room truly knew who she was: Amelia. Seated among a lively circle of financial partners, Amelia was confidently presenting a cutting-edge HR initiative that, in her words, could far surpass Clean Frame in both scope and social value. She smiled with ease, her hands gliding over slides, repeatedly emphasizing that this was the first fair internal assessment tool inspired by a once-overlooked model from a previous company. Emma approached one of the investors, the same man who once dismissed her as too inexperienced to earn trust, and whispered just one sentence into his ear. "You're listening to a copy of a stolen idea." The man turned, brow furrowing. Emma didn't wait for a reaction. She immediately sent a file to his phone, a video of her presenting the prototype of Clean Frame before her dismissal. The video included timestamps, the original file name, intellectual property registration, and the final login record from her computer before the presentation at Arjun's. Emma didn't need to stand on stage. The truth would take the stage itself. 10 minutes later, a staff member leaned in and whispered something into Amelia's ear. Her expression faltered, but the smile remained. The act continued. Emma stood at a distance, leaning casually against the refreshment bar, sipping a non-alcoholic cocktail. Moments later, a tall man wearing an investor relations badge approached her and bowed politely. "We apologize for the misjudgment. Tonight, the private boardroom on the 22nd floor has been reopened, reserved exclusively for Clean Frame, and for you alone." Emma nodded, but she didn't smile, because this wasn't a victory. This was a beginning. The beginning of a truth brought into the light. The beginning of an empire built from ruins. And the beginning of a declaration, not with weapons, but with the precision of a steel-coated bullet loaded with intellect and resolve. That night on the 22nd floor, Emma walked into an empty boardroom that had been waiting for her all along. On the wall, the Clean Frame logo glowed, beside a simple phrase, "Built from betrayal, backed by truth." And in a far corner, someone watched, not Amelia, but Jonathan Hale. He said nothing. He simply nodded, because he knew the piece had officially moved into play, and from now on, the board belonged to her. In the world of tech and HR, where algorithms evolve by the hour and a company's reputation is measured in clicks, nothing spreads faster than the right statement at the right moment. And that Monday morning, the media erupted when Helion Group, a conglomerate once infamous for high turnover and quiet lawsuits from former employees, announced a full-scale partnership with the HR platform Clean Frame. The headline, shared over 3 million times within 24 hours, read simply, "The one they fired is now the one they need." None other than Emma Blair. Emma, once dismissed from Arjun's in front of a packed boardroom, now had her name boldly printed in Helion's new human capital reform policy. The company didn't use flowery words or hide their reasoning. In a live interview, Helion's CEO said bluntly, "We thought we needed a digital system, but after meeting Emma Blair, we realized what we needed was a human one." That statement hit Arjun's like a bucket of cold water, a place that was once both Emma's home and her downfall. Inside Arjun's, the crisis didn't explode loudly. It festered. The board called for a series of closed-door meetings. All files related to Emma Blair's dismissal due to data breach were reopened. Mid-level executives who had played a role began scrubbing traces, altering documents, some even hiring personal attorneys. But what shook them more than the media was Emma's silence. She didn't post on social media. She didn't grant interviews. She didn't clap back. She simply updated the clean frame interface, expanded the platform to 5 countries in 10 days, and signed contracts with 3 of Argence's longtime rivals. Her success wasn't born of vengeance. It was born of action. At Clean Frame's temporary office, Emma sat before a screen, reviewing the media strategy proposal sent by Helion. One section stood out titled, Reclaim, the Name Campaign, Restoring Names to Those Made Invisible. They invited Emma to take the stage at their launch event to share her story as a symbol of survival, of overcoming the brutal labels that corporations so casually pin on people. She placed a hand on the bamboo plaque hanging above her desk, a gift from a young engineer who had just joined the team. Etched into it were words that quietly haunted "You fired her. She rebuilt everything you feared she might." Emma closed her eyes for a moment. Her mind drifted back to that boardroom where she was accused, dismissed, and pushed out of her dream. She saw again the CEO's cold stare, the indifferent headshakes, and worst of all, the half-smile on her sister's face in the hallway, as if everything had gone exactly as planned. They thought that day was Emma's end. But today, that so-called ending has forced the entire industry to re-examine what it believed. Meanwhile, in a separate apartment, Amelia sat alone. The TV still echoed the news cycle, and Emma Blair was the name that kept repeating. She picked up the remote switching channels, but no matter where she turned, that name was unavoidable. The inspiring CEO, the rebuilder, the frame now a symbol of justice for tech workers. Amelia clenched her wine glass, her face pale. She knew now that no trick, no influence, no carefully woven web of connections she once used to cut Emma out could bury the truth anymore. Emma hadn't just returned. She was now standing on a foundation, stronger than any glass-walled boardroom. And this time, no one could strike her name off the list ever again. No one. Not ever. The launch event for Clean Frame took place on a gently rainy afternoon at Sentinel Hall in the heart of the city. No fireworks, no grand stage. Everything was arranged with minimalist elegance, a white and grey palette, a single small Clean Frame logo centered on the backdrop, and the tagline that had already begun trending across social media: Truth, Tracked, Transparent. Emma walked out from behind the curtain, in a monochrome suit. No brand labels, no name tags, no need for introductions. As she stood before the microphone, the room fell into an uncanny silence. Not because people expected a dramatic spectacle, but because everyone there knew they were about to hear a truth that had been hidden for far too long. She didn't read a speech, no teleprompter. Emma simply told her story. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear, each word slicing through the air. I was once fired from a company for a charge I was never allowed to defend against. I once sat on my bedroom floor holding a stolen draft, realizing that justice doesn't always accompany the systems we trust. But it was in that moment, when I had nothing left to protect, that I began to rebuild. Behind her, a large screen lit up with a video Emma presenting Project Novus, the authentic version time-stamped before the incident. Below it, the patent registration for Clean Frame, dated long before Helion or any investor had even heard of the project. She didn't just speak, she proved. And then Emma did something no one expected. She projected an internal email leak onto the screen. It revealed unauthorized access from a device sharing the same network as her account On the very night the draft was swapped, the IP address, it matched the location of her home and her sister's. The room was dead silent. A few reporters began scribbling furiously. Some attendees exchanged shocked glances. Emma didn't name names. She didn't point fingers. She simply said, "Sometimes the deepest pain doesn't come from betrayal, but from being betrayed by the one who knew your dreams best." She paused for a beat, then continued, this time with unmistakable strength. "But it's from people like that I learned my greatest lesson. I wasn't born to ask for space. I was born to create it." The audience rose to their feet in applause. One person cried. Another nodded silently, as if she had finally spoken the truth they had never dared to. That night, Emma's speech became the most shared video in the country's tech industry history. From Twitter to LinkedIn, she was no longer referred to as the victim, but as the one who stood tall in an industry that once tried to bury her. And at that very moment, in the familiar apartment, Amelia sat alone, the lamplight reflecting her pale face off the laptop screen. Her name wasn't mentioned, but in every viewer's eyes, it was understood. A few calls came in, from partners, from reporters, from lawyers, but she didn't pick up. For the first time, the woman who was used to controlling things from behind the curtain began to realize the spotlight doesn't just illuminate those who take the stage, it also exposes whoever hides behind it. And for the first time, she was the one with no backup script. Amelia had always known how to command a room without ever standing in the center. She thrived on subtlety, on reading the moment, and bending trust to her will. But there was one thing she forgot. Light isn't something you can control. Once it shines in the right direction, it reveals everything. After Emma's explosive speech, Amelia's phone lit up with messages so rapidly that it never stopped buzzing. There were texts from former colleagues, from PR departments, from a few investors who had once promised to consider funding. And then came a call from the very corporation where she was currently leading strategic communications. Brief and cold, "Amelia, we need you to clarify the IP data mentioned during CleanFrame's presentation. Until then, all activities are suspended." She sat in stunned silence, too drained to react. She turned on the TV, switched channels, and still saw Emma's face. Not as a little sister anymore, but as someone with integrity, strength, and a presence that could no longer be pulled back into the past. Social media lit up with trending topics. Who switched the file? Is give her back? Her name? The other sister. An old interview of Amelia, where she once hinted at her overly ambitious younger sister, was dug up and recirculated, now captioned with biting sarcasm. Perhaps ambition is the only thing Amelia couldn't steal. Across the city, Emma sat in a modest workspace, surrounded by a young team engineers, designers, and tech lawyers, none of whom had joined CleanFrame for high pay, but because they saw something most corporations had lost: the defense of truth. Jonathan Hale, the man who had once handed her a business card with no name, entered the room and placed a new contract on her desk. 3 non-profit organizations have expressed interest in integrating CleanFrame into their internal evaluation systems. A few governments are looking for similar solutions in the public sector. Emma skimmed through the pages, then looked up at him. "I didn't build this to be famous. I built it so that people like me would never have to walk out of a boardroom with their dignity stolen." Jonathan nodded slowly. "And that's why they trust you more than anyone who's ever stood on that stage." A few hours later, an anonymous email arrived in CleanFrame's inbox. Sent from an untraceable address, it contained only one sentence: "I'm sorry, but you've chosen a path with no return." Emma stared at the words for a long while. She felt no anger, no sadness, just a quiet certainty that everything had finally come into focus. The person who once thrived in the shadows now had nowhere left to hide, and the one who was pushed down had turned the fall into a foundation. She didn't need to defeat anyone. She only needed to ensure that no one would ever speak her truth for her again. 7 p.m. The 18-story glass tower of Helion Group lit up for the first time in its history for an event it wasn't hosting. A private gathering, invite-only reserved for true power players in investment tech law and C-suite leadership. And among all the perfectly tailored suits, the sparkling wine glasses and half-whispered talks of nine-figure deals, the name on everyone's lips wasn't Helion's current CEO. It was Emma Blair. She entered without fanfare, no golden business cards. Her presence alone was enough to cause conversations to pause for a beat. Some whispered. Some approached her with handshakes, as if trying to reserve a seat on a train everyone knew was starting to accelerate. Emma wore a navy blue suit, minimalist, refined. Not glamorous, but it carried a quality no one could imitate, the aura of someone who had walked through hell and rebuilt heaven with bare hands. She was invited to the central seat at the executive roundtable, the same seat that once belonged to the head of the industry's largest investment firm, a man who had spoken at Davos and who 2 years ago declined to work with her on the grounds of lacking institutional footing and contextual expertise appropriate for leadership circles. Tonight, he poured her wine, and Emma, she simply smiled lightly without pride. Because those with true strength don't need to reference the past to validate the present. The evening flowed with soft jazz in the background. Jonathan Hale appeared beside her and leaned in. It's your first time at this table, and every person here is watching to see which card you'll play. Emma didn't look at him. She took a sip of her wine, eyes fixed on the city skyline beyond the glass. I'm not playing cards anymore. I'm rewriting the rules. Jonathan let out a low laugh. The world's not used to young women rewriting rules. Then it's time they learned, she replied, calm, no emphasis needed. At that moment in the far corner of the room, a woman stood silently. Hair tied high, elegant black dress, Amelia. She hadn't been invited, but through old connections, she managed to slip onto the auxiliary guest list, standing near the balcony like a shadow. She watched Emma, seated among the elite, speaking to those who once ruled the room, now tilting their heads, hanging onto her every word. No one looked at Amelia anymore. No spotlight reached her now. She pulled out her phone, scrolling. A message from a former investor flashed on the screen. Clean Frame just declined collaboration. They said they don't work with anyone tied to past intellectual property manipulation. Amelia clenched her fists. For the first time in her life, she felt what it meant to be excluded from a game she once thought she controlled. No one accused her. No one named her. But she knew. The harshest verdict isn't a sentence spoken aloud. It's when the whole world rises for someone and chooses silence when it sees you. Back at the center of the room, a young investor, once outshone by Emma in a pitching round the year before, approached with a humble smile. Emma, if you had one thing to say to those who once knocked you down, what would it be? Emma thought for a moment, set her glass down, and answered in an even, unresentful voice, thank you. Because without them, I wouldn't have learned how to stand up without being lifted. The room went quiet for several seconds, not because her words were cutting, but because they were real. And in a world full of masks, truth raw and unflinching is the one thing that always makes people pause. That night, as guests departed, Emma lingered for a few minutes on the balcony. The city pulsed below headlights, streaming like lifeblood through a vast body. She knew this was still only the beginning. This success Loud firm was not the destination, but it was an undeniable message. She, the one once erased from the system, was now the one designing the new one. No bowing, no permission needed. Just forward. Following the Helion Group launch event and the private gathering that forced investors to revise their people to watch lists, the name Emma Blair was no longer just a symbol of return. She had officially entered the ranks of those capable of redefining power, not through titles, but through trust built from scars. But those who once thrived on manipulation like Amelia weren't about to sit quietly and watch that happen. She knew that if things continued this way, no one would believe her again. And people like Amelia don't tolerate being forgotten. 1 week after the party, an accidentally leaked internal email began spreading across underground tech forums. Its content suggested that CleanFrame had used source code based on a previous Argent's project draft from the same period when Emma was employed there. Though vague and lacking proof, the subject line alone was enough to send a tremor through Helion's stock price and prompt several new investors to request a full audit of CleanFrame's development history. Emma received the news early that morning, just as she wrapped up a meeting with engineers at the Singapore branch. Jonathan Hale called from an encrypted line, his voice calm but laced with gravity. "This is a blow below the belt, and it's not aimed at your code. It's aimed at trust." Emma wasn't surprised. She had anticipated this day would come. What she didn't expect was that her own sister would sacrifice her last shred of credibility to strike so viciously. She didn't speak to the press. She didn't post a rebuttal on social media. Instead, she called her legal team and requested the public release of CleanFrame's complete development timeline, including the very first draft was saved on Google Drive, commit history from her personal computer, screenshots of internal access logs, and the finishing blow, a secret recording of the private meeting between her and Jonathan Hale, right after she was fired, in which she verbally outlines the full CleanFrame concept before a single line of code was written. The next day, CleanFrame hosted a live-streamed transparency session, not as a defensive maneuver, but as a dissection of trust itself. Emma appeared on camera, no heavy makeup, no scripted speech. She simply opened each file, explained each line, walked through every development phase, and finally played the recording. In it, her voice came through shaky but firm. "I can't go back to work. But if there's one thing I won't give up, it's the belief that a company can be built where no one has to live in fear." Immediately after the broadcast, social media exploded. What began as sympathy turned into profound respect. People no longer said Emma was framed. They started calling her the woman who turned the trap into a launch pad. Meanwhile, Amelia received an email from the executive board at her current consulting firm. "We cannot retain an individual linked to the dissemination of false and reputation-damaging information within the industry." For the first time, Amelia had no excuse. No way to hide behind the curtain. Every justification, every manipulation, every scheme crumbled when placed in front of someone who had chosen truth as their weapon. Emma refused to answer any questions about her former sister. She said only one thing, and it was enough. If someone throws mud at you, you have two choices: throw it back or build a foundation with it and stand taller than they'll ever reach. And that was her choice. Not to defeat anyone, but to ensure that those who chose the shadows would finally open their eyes to a light they could no longer extinguish. 6 months after the explosive transparency session, the name CleanFrame was no longer that of an upstart struggling to prove itself. It had become a new global standard in human resources. Over 200 medium and large companies across 3 continents had signed on to adopt the system. Most importantly, something unprecedented was happening. Employees, once just numbers in a spreadsheet, were beginning to have a voice in places where they had none before. Emma Blair, once labeled a girl who couldn't keep internal matters confidential, now stood on stage at the Global Transparency Summit, praised as the first woman to turn fairness into a functional, scalable product. This event wasn't a typical awards ceremony. It was a gathering of governments, corporations, investment funds, and human rights organizations to discuss the future. And the opening speaker was none other than the girl once cast aside like a regrettable error in the system. As Emma walked onto the stage, a soft spotlight followed her. She didn't need a script. She looked directly at the thousands in front of her and opened with a sentence that held the room breathless. "The day I was fired, I didn't lose my job. I got my name back. A name that had been erased from internal directories, crossed out from HR records, turned into a cautionary tale during ethics risk training sessions." She recounted it calmly, but her eyes shone like steel. "They taught me that if I stayed quiet, I could live peacefully." What they didn't understand is that silence has never saved anyone from erasure. It only convinces others that you never existed. The room fell completely still. No one breathed too loudly. No one dared glance at their phone. She continued, "So I chose a different path. I took back my name. Then I built a system, so no one like me would ever have to fight for theirs again." She raised her hand and tapped a button. Behind her, the Clean Frame logo appeared, but this time with one added word: Clean Frame Foundation, a non-profit branch of the original project, dedicated to using company profits to support those wrongfully terminated, misjudged, or lacking the resources to rise again. Emma announced that from now on, 20% of Clean Frame's profits would fund retraining programs for women pushed out of the workforce. 100 annual scholarships would go to individuals who had been silenced by legal clauses. And for the first time, an HR tech platform would allow employees to evaluate their superiors with full protection from an integrated virtual legal system. The room rose to its feet, not just for the accomplishments, but because for the first time they saw someone who didn't use success to settle scores, but to create justice for those who never had a voice. That same night, an article spread like wildfire, headlined, "Emma Blair didn't just reclaim her name, she gave ours back too." Amelia, now completely absent from the public eye, read that article in a quiet, unfamiliar cafe. No one recognized her anymore. No one looked at her the way they once looked at Emma Blair's sister. She closed her phone. Outside the window, a light rain fell. In that moment, she realized when someone chooses to rewrite history with their pain, the imposters get erased without needing a final sentence. And Emma, the woman who was once humiliated, robbed and cornered, was now not just the head of an empire. She was the one rewriting the rules. And this time, no one else could write her story for her. A few weeks after being honored at the Global Transparency Summit, everything around Emma began shifting to a whole new level. Governments began consulting her on national HR policies. A top technology university proposed naming a scholarship after her. And people once rejected from hiring rounds for being underqualified or too quiet for corporate culture started showing up at Clean Frame's office not for money, but because for the first time they had found a place where they didn't need permission to be respected. But amid the interviews, calls, and global contracts, one thing made Emma pause deeply and silently: a handwritten letter, delivered by post-ivory envelope, no return address. Inside were only 2 lines in slanted script, the faded ink a shade of soft violet. Perhaps I lost you long before I tried to beat you. I have nothing left to say. But if you still hold a door open, please don't lock it forever. No signature. But Emma didn't need one. She knew that handwriting better than any line of code that had ever passed her screen. Amelia. The same person who once stood beside her in their tiny kitchen, splitting the last loaf of bread mid-month, and the same person who had first thrown her out of a dream simply for refusing to stand behind. Emma folded the letter and placed it on the table. She didn't reply, not because she was still angry, but because she had come to understand that some apologies should not be delivered in words but in actions. And some doors, though once open to deep hurt, don't need to be closed in hatred. They just need to remain untouched by sabotage. That night, Emma didn't stay late at the office like she usually did. She walked alone through the city's cultural district where an art exhibition called The Silence Voices was taking place. Unexpectedly, she found herself in one of the centerpieces, a painting. A woman walking through the rain, surrounded by no umbrellas or coats, only words scratched across the air. Not qualified. Former failure. Poor cultural fit. And behind her, those phrases were beginning to dissolve. Emma stood silently. She didn't know who painted it, but she understood completely. When your story is no longer just yours, it becomes the spark for thousands of others who thought their flame had already gone out. That night, Emma wrote a short post. Not about the project, not about accomplishments, just one simple paragraph. I never wanted to build an empire. I only wanted to create a world where anyone could walk into a boardroom and know their voice doesn't need permission to be heard. The post was shared 8 million times in 72 hours, not because it used dazzling language, but because it spoke. The one truth we've all silently hoped for, that respect should never be a reward, it should be a given. And in that moment, Emma realized something deeper than all else. Sometimes the greatest doors don't open with a key of power, but with the heart of someone who was once locked out and chose never to let anyone else feel that way again. It was a clear blue Monday morning, unusually bright, and none of the senior executives at Arjun's expected that day to mark a turning point, not because of a critical meeting, but because of an invitation that had kept them up all week. Arjun's received an internal memo from the Intersectoral Strategic Partnership Committee requesting leading corporations to participate in a national reform program for employee evaluation systems, an initiative spearheaded by a coalition of corporations, human rights organizations, and top tech investors. At the bottom of the memo, the name of the program's lead representative was listed: Emma Blair, founder and CEO CleanFrame. The Arjun's executive boardroom froze for a few seconds. Vincent Miles, the CEO who had personally fired Emma, placed his hand on the table, his eyes darkening. Around him, those who had once smirked as Emma was escorted from the boardroom now stared at their laps, unable to look one another in the eye. Because they all knew the woman once cast out of their system as the liability was now the architect of the very system they were mandated to enter. When Emma was informed that Arjun's would be among the required participants, she merely nodded. No smile, no vindication. She didn't need it, because the most powerful revenge is becoming the person they can no longer ignore. 2 weeks later, at the inaugural conference of the program companies took their pre-assigned seats, Emma stepped onto the stage with calm composure and opened with a sentence that drew the entire room to silence. I stand here not to demand apologies. I stand here to prove that if someone once discarded can rise and rebuild everything, then an entire system can be rebuilt too, if we have the courage. She introduced the latest CleanFrame modules, including blind audit, a reverse auditing feature that enables employees to give anonymous, honest feedback without fear of retaliation. But the most groundbreaking innovation was the honor guard mechanism, where every employee who had once been excluded would be paired with a system-backed protector to ensure they were never left alone if challenged again. The room stirred. For the first time, power didn't just flow top-down, it flowed both ways. Emma never mentioned Arjun's. She didn't have to name Vincent Miles, but every eye in the room understood that each word she spoke struck directly at the fractures of a system once thought untouchable. After the session, Vincent approached her. He forced a polite smile and extended a hand. "Miss Blair, I have to admit, I never imagined I'd be sitting here listening to you speak about corporate justice." Emma shook his hand, but her gaze did not drop an inch. "I'm not speaking. I'm surviving it. And all I hope is that no one else ever has to." There were no cameras, no press. But those standing nearby, CEOs, HR leaders, fell silent, because each of them, at some point, had removed someone like Emma from their organizations, and now they wouldn't dare repeat it. That evening, Emma received a message from an old colleague, the only one who had the courage to text her after she was fired. "I saw you today. For the first time, I saw people rise, not for a title, but for trust." Emma smiled softly and looked out her window. The city was still glowing, but it wasn't the cold, sterile light of the old boardrooms. This time, it was the light shining through the very doors she had once been shut out of, and that she now opened with her own hands. Not just for herself, but for everyone who was never even invited in. If you've followed the story this far, then Emma Blair's journey is no longer just a story. It's a mirror, reflecting all the moments you were misjudged, shut out, or forced into silence simply because you didn't have the power to speak up. But you see, Emma didn't come back for revenge. She didn't need to scream to prove anything. She simply stood firm and unshaken, and let her presence answer everything that once went unheard. And that's the lesson I carry with me. After hearing this story, justice doesn't always come from a courtroom. Sometimes it comes from how you keep living boldly upright, unapologetically yourself. This world doesn't lack people who have been pushed aside. What it needs more of is people brave enough to redraw the lines at the center. If you believe there are still voices that deserve the chance to rise, if something stirred deep in your heart while listening, leave a comment below and share this video with someone who may need a reminder you are not alone. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell to walk with Toch, story through the journeys ahead, where we tell the stories no one else dares to tell. About people the world once dismissed, but who made it impossible to ignore them ever again.